Right, now how do I follow on from that? And Caroline, so, talking. Look at me getting training now. As close as to mouth as possible. Right, I don't know quite how to follow on from all of that, to be honest with you. Caroline was amazing, and a lot of what Caroline spoke about aligns with a lot of what I talk about, but in a different way. I come at it from a different aspect. I want to tell you that last year I did come down with COVID, and I came down with COVID because I was so absolutely overwhelmed with fear. That fear was triggered by my daughter going back to work in the nursing environment when 3 nurses had just died. We all did, all over the media. That triggered a bigger fear for me because when my daughter was 15, nearly 16, I was told she was going to die, and she ended up on life support for 3 weeks. So that was a real, huge fear for me. What that did for me was weaken my immune system. And when it weakened my immune system, I came down like a ton of bricks. But I didn't come down as bad as everybody suspects it was. I was just tired. I was poorly for 3 days, and then I was back up. I will say as well, the immune system is reliant a lot on our reaction to fear. And I want you to bear that in mind when we're talking today, because I'm going to ask you to start to develop some compassion for those people who are pro-vax. I'm going to ask you to develop compassion for those people who are on the other side of the fence. And the reason why I'm doing that is because that compassion is the antidote to fear. And the antidote to fear is the way we get them on board with this freedom fight. So I'm really, really hoping that's what you're going to hear today. So I just want to say that we all, even those pro-vaxxers, have the same agenda. We all want freedom. I suspect the majority of us here even complied with all the restrictions to begin with. We gave our power away to fear, but we thought at the time it was only an interim measure. As human beings, we fed into that process for the sake of humanity, and it's for the sake of humanity that you are standing here today. But it's been 14 months now, and the only thing that we've proven with lockdowns is that they don't work. They're detrimental to our physical health, our mental health, our economy. And the people really trying to control all of this, they don't have a clue either. They're making as much of a fool of themselves as they can. They're moving the goalposts all the time. We all want to see some normality restored. We want to see the economy repaired. We want social events happening. We want to freely visit our family and friends, and we want to see our children enjoying each other and their friendships and family members. We don't want those restrictions. So the enemy here is fear, not COVID, not the people that are supporting COVID. Fear drives a dichotomous all or nothing thinking, which has got us into this mess. Fear has proven to be destructive to society and divisive to all of our relationships. It prevents our immune system from working at optimum levels, which you've just heard from Caroline. Fear has driven all the extreme measures in lockdown, and it's destroyed, or is fast destroying, humanity. So let's talk a little bit about humanity and the evolutionary process. It depends on us being human beings, not human doings. We are wired for connection, and we're wired for connection in our mind, body and soul. And when we're deprived or denied that connection, our very survival is threatened. Human touch is essential to well-being when we're being deprived of the most basic human contact and connection. And when that happens, we experience trauma. Fear and trauma are inextricably linked. The energy around fear and trauma is as palpable as the energy that you've all brought here today. And love and compassion really is the antidote to fear and trauma. When we're in fear, we just feel unsafe. And we measure that by our previous experiences. We measure it in our brain because that's where we go to when we're in fear. And then we get overwhelmed with emotion. Our control centre in our brain consists of two parts. It consists of the inner part and the outer part. I'm in no way going to overwhelm you with all the science. I'm going to really simplify this today and make it so easy. But we have these two parts in our brain, and when the one part is triggered, the other part goes offline, and we lose the ability to do rational thinking and to be reasonable. Just as an interesting, by the way, did any of you know that we've got 3 brains in our body?
Yes!
Yeah, I've got one down here. So we've got 3 brains in our body, and there's one in our head, one in our heart, and one in our stomach. Are you? And whilst we've got those 3 brains, the centre of that is our emotion. When you look at where our heart is placed, it's our emotion, and that is what overwhelms us. When we look at fear, we look at all of the memories that trigger us. They're all stored in our subconscious brain, and when they're stored in our subconscious brain, that works at such phenomenal speed that we don't understand, we don't even know what's triggering us. All we're left with is the connection between our heart, mind and gut. So is that our heart, mind and gut triggers the resulting behaviour. We've all heard of the fight and flight system, right? We've all heard how we get overwhelmed with a chemical response, how adrenaline and cortisol floods our body, and we've all heard how that generates the behaviour. But did you know that there's 2 more? Did you know that there's freeze and there's fix? They're the 2 other responses. When people are in trauma, they go to those 4 responses. Fight and flight are the first 2 immediate ones. Freeze and fix are the longer term ones. They're the ones that are ingrained in us from childhood. The fight and flight is what will give your 97-year-old granny the strength to beat off a mugger. A mother to lift a car up when her child's trapped underneath it. You can't honestly underestimate the power of this whole system that we have. Our brain goes offline, and when we're in trauma, we don't experience it by memory, we actually relive the similar flavour that we are relating our current circumstance to. So just sit with that for one moment and just think, we relive it, we don't actually remember it. And like Caroline said, everything is stored in our body, and fear is stored in our body, and when it's stored in our body, it does create disease. And I can tell you now that it created disease for me when I was younger, and it didn't show up in my body until a long time later when I was diagnosed with breast cancer. And I avoided and used all of the methods that I embrace in my practice to actually avoid using any chemo and radiotherapy despite a recommendation for a treatment plan of that. Despite the odds, and despite not taking the medication for 5 years, I'm here and I'm standing and I'm completely clear of breast cancer. And now you're all going to make me cry. So let's talk about where all this starts. This starts with social conditioning, which starts in our early childhood. And it starts with the people who are around us in our environment. It starts with the culture that we live in. It starts with our family, our primary carers. At no point do our primary carers ever intend to cause us trauma. But they do, because we don't have the life experience, the wisdom, the academic intelligence to understand where they're coming from before we're 8 years old. All that we have is emotional dysregulation. We are completely reliant on our emotions before the age of 8, simply because our brain is not developed enough. So the battle we're faced with when we're dealing with people who are in fear is just that battle. And as I said before, the only antidote to that is compassion and understanding. Now you lot, you're all good with rationalised thinking because you're stood here and you understand it. The person who wants to have the vaccination, the person who gets angry at you because you're not locking down, because you're not wearing a mask, that person is in that cycle of fear. And that cycle of fear is triggering them into that trauma response. So remember that and develop compassion when you're dealing with them. Don't go back at them with more anger. Like I said right at the beginning, there's an antidote. And I don't know whether you're going to like this or not, but I actually made something up from my name. And it started off, I woke up and I got a little download in the morning, and I thought, oh my God, that's so amazing. And then I go into, no it's not, and I go into all the fear around it. But I'm going to share it here with you today, because I think when we do this, when we adopt this as a cycle, a toxic cycle of fear, we understand where it originates. So I'm Jacqui, and my name is spelled Jacqui. We start off with an agenda, and our agendas are triggered by judgment, and that's what creates the conflict. When we go into judgment, we are not accountable. We are not accountable for our own actions, our own thoughts and our own feelings. We lack objectivity and we lack that rationalised thinking. We get critical of the people around us. We go into that dichotomous thinking. We like to make ourselves right, but we do that at the expense of making somebody else wrong, which is clearly going to hack them all off. We go into a blame and shame culture where we want to belittle them for not thinking the same way as us, for not feeding into our agenda. And it closes us down and it closes them down. And it destroys connection and compassion. So how do we deal with that? We deal with that by asking questions. And we deal with that by opening our mind. We get curious with open-ended questions to explore and to reflect back to them what is happening. Not to tell them what's wrong, but to reflect back to them really what their own thought process is and how it's impacting on them and society. We listen without judgment and we set our own agenda aside. We develop understanding, because when we develop understanding we get to see, we make it safe for them to explain to us and to share with us what's motivating them, what's demotivating them. We get to see things from their perspective. And finally, we get insight. And when we get that insight and we pull all of that together, we have compassion and we have empathy for their position. And their position makes them feel unsafe. So bring it all the way back round the cycle of fear, and just look at them and say, whatever side of the fence they're on, you can deal with it and you can help them see sense.
Thank you so much.